Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. Live on the phone with me today, I have Lisa Skeete Tatum in New York. Lisa is the founder and CEO of Landit, the personalized playbook for women seeking to move their career forward. Lisa was previously a general partner at Cardinal Partners and held leadership positions at Proctor & Gamble. She holds a BS in engineering from Cornell University and an MBA from Harvard University. Lisa, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Angela. Glad to be here.
Gosh, it's so nice to meet you. I didn't get into a ton of detail in the opening, but your personal career history is just incredibly impressive. I know you've actually served on a number of boards and you've hit a lot of high career achievements. So I know we're just going to get a ton from talking to you today. I'm curious, what initially inspired you to start down this career path that you kind of ultimately ended up on?
Oh, I'm not sure anyone knows in the beginning. You may have a goal of where you think you're going to go, but I certainly didn't start out as a chemical engineer thinking I would ultimately be CEO of a startup company. But I started life off at P&G, excellent company in engineering and product development, and then was fortunate enough to move on to the more business side. And then I got recruited away to join a startup in New York, and that's where I kind of caught the bug. And we had about a year to launch a line of 600-plus products, and I said, my goodness, this is exciting. How do I do this for more people? And someone said, well, what about venture capital? I'm like, well, what is that? Not a lot of venture capital going on where I'm from, but I'm like, that seems like it fits. And so they said, well, you got to go to business school. So I applied, and I got in, and I turned to my husband. I said, what are you going to do? And then he applied, and he got in, and we went together.
Wow.
And it was great. And actually, that's where I met my co-founder of Landit, because she was there with her husband. So we bonded instantaneously. But I actually went back to business school to do venture capital. I graduated and focused on healthcare technology investing, which I did for over a decade as a general partner. And I always say I found myself living what I call this double life, because I had my VC by day, but I've always been committed to creating access for others, and I was doing that through my board work. And I said, my goodness, there's got to be a way to combine the two. And that's kind of where I got stuck, because I had no idea what that looked like. Everyone expected me to know, including myself. And it felt pretty crappy. And I said, well, if I'm having a challenge figuring it out, other women must really be having a challenge. So let's set about finding a solution for that. And so it was out of my own kind of personal pain, which we can talk about more later, that Landit was kind of born.
Wow, that's such a great story. So it sounds like that's what really kind of inspired Landit to begin, essentially. That's incredible.
Yes, because you realize, especially this day and age, no one has just one career inflection point. And as we looked at this, we realized that as someone progresses in their career, they hit one of three places. It could be, I'm in a company and I'm just trying to figure out how to more successfully navigate, or maybe I'm somewhere feeling stuck, which is where I was, and I'm not sure how to get out of it, or maybe I'm in transition, I'm looking for what's next. And realizing that as you progress, the more challenging those inflection points become, so much so that as we sit here today, the largest number of professional, educated women, not firing on all cylinders, but they want to be. And on the other side, you have companies and boards. I'd love to hire more women, love to have them on my boards. I can't seem to find them. But more importantly, when I do find them, how do I invest in their retention and development and progression? And so we looked at that and said, it's actually not a supply issue or demand issue, it's a market failure. So we wanted to put something in place to enable that smart, relevant connection, but we really wanted to look at the individual and figure out how to successfully path her. Because what we know is it's not for lack of motivation or track record or skills. It's where do I start? And how do I connect with the tools and the humans and the resources I need to reach my goal? So that's our major objective, which is pathing you, giving you what you need when you need it in a way that's relevant to you.
Oh, that's
great. The playbook.
Well, so before we go too far, I'd love it if you might just take a moment and share with us more about what Landit is. Like what kind of functionality does it have? How does it serve women in this, helping path them? Like, how do we use Landit?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is we develop tools for success. We just happen to be focused on women because that's where you see the pain and the lack of progress, et cetera. And so what we did is we said, well, what is it that we know is really critical for success, either things that we've learned by the School of Hard Knocks, or have been fortunate enough to be in a great position. And we knit those things together. So it's everything from helping you figure out what is it I can do that fits with the 360 of me. I know when I was transitioning to this next career, it's like, well, where do you go after you've been a general partner for 12 years? So helping people figure out what is that next step that would allow me to bring my full self. Then we actually connect you to those opportunities, whether it is new positions internally or externally or even fellowships. I was well past 20 before I even knew about the Henry Crown Fellowship at the Aspen Institute, and that's actually where Landit was founded out of my project. Your personal brand. Unfortunately, women notoriously undersell themselves. And if you don't talk about your accomplishments, your successes, and even your failures, not only do you look risky, you don't even get a shot. So we've defined what are those 12 elements for success of your brand, and then we give you an action plan to get there. Another item that we have is this notion of building your personal board of advisors. So we're often told, well, it's about how many connections you have. It's actually not about that. It's about codifying your network and having the right ask and the right cadence. So we enable you to do that. And we bring world-class coaching because often most of us have never had a coach, don't know the power of a coach, and it's often reserved for someone who's in the C-suite or on their way. So we enable that kind of caliber and access to anyone who's on a platform at any point. And then we have this lifelong learning. But the key is that it's one size fits one. We, based on what you tell us, we recommend something that's relevant to you or connect you with something that's relevant so that you can more successfully navigate forward.
Oh, that's great. Well, so you mentioned just now the importance of a personal board. And if we've never heard of that, how would you describe a personal board to us? And maybe why is it so important? How could it help us?
Absolutely. Well, I would say most people know when they think about a board, they think about a mentor. And what we say is a mentor is one of the 5 key people on your board, but it's really about sponsorship and other things. So think of it as your dream team, your own Keiretsu. And we believe that there are 5 key people you need to have. So of course you need the mentor, someone who you bounce ideas off of, who you talk to. Then you really need a sponsor, someone who talks about you, someone who is a door opener for you. Appoint expert. So, I was a first-time CEO running a tech company, and so I went to people that I knew who could help me, who had expertise. Or you think of a connector, like Sheila is an amazing connector. My husband is a phenomenal connector. So who do you know in the world who can get you an introduction? And then we always say, who's your close friend who can see you do that ugly cry, if you will, so that you have the right ask of the right person and the right cadence. And that's how you utilize your board, because I'm a huge supporter of people and their progress and their progression. But when someone is, can you be my mentor? It feels so incredibly heavy. What you really want to do is be able to know why you're asking or what you're asking of that person and how can you reciprocate. And that's how you think about leveraging and building your network. It really should be that formal. Otherwise, it doesn't have the discipline that you need in order to grow and to leverage and to maximize.
That makes a lot of sense. And, I guess another question, too, with regards to personal board is, when should we be, at what age should we start thinking about building this personal board? Is it something we should wait until we are the CEO of a company, or should we be looking at it at a younger time?
So I have 2 teenage boys, and I tell them they should be doing it right now. When I think about, even as a venture capitalist, my first deals were as a result of professors I had in school. And so when you think about whether, those early tender ages or even when you're a career, the more you progress, the more important that network becomes. And it's not as if you just walk up to someone and say, hey, will you be my sponsor? It's like, hey, can we go study? Nobody does that. So you have to cultivate these relationships over time. And it does take time to move on from the mentor to the sponsor. So you should be mindful of that, and you should be investing in that, not just when you need something or want something, but people who are truly vested in you and you are vested in them. So as early as you can, that's when you should start. I learned this when I was 21 at P&G, and I've been managing by Excel spreadsheet. And I was like, gosh, wouldn't it be great if there was a tool? So that was one of the first things that we built with Landit.
Oh, that's so interesting. Well, so speaking of tools, I actually looked through Landit. I tried it out myself, and I found part of it that was called like Track Your Achievements. And I'm curious from your perspective, like what sorts of things do you see that people are tracking? And in your view, why is it important that we consider tracking our goals in some kind of a way like this?
Absolutely. So keeping track of your accomplishments on a weekly basis is one of the most powerful things that we can do for ourselves, because otherwise we suffer from LIFO, like last in, first out. So you think about going in for a negotiation or advocating for a project, etc. If you don't know what you've done, or you're not keeping track of the value that you're bringing, then you can't be your own best advocate, because no one's going to do it for you. But there are 5 dimensions of keeping track of your accomplishments, and maybe it's something you've done for yourself. Maybe it's something you've contributed at work or a project. Maybe it's something you've done for your network or your skill development or your brand. But it's this notion of having a repository of you. So when you look at how you're spending your time, unfortunately, women sometimes get a disproportionate number of housekeeping projects, so you want to keep a check on that. But this notion of when I go in, I am coming from a position of strength because I know the value that I've had, or the impact that I've had, and I am, the controller of my destiny, if you will. So it's something so simple. It takes, a minute or two a week, but when you think about the leverage and the power, it's one of the most important habits of what we believe are successful people. So absolutely you should be doing it, and we make it easy.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, so I want to jump to like a totally different topic that you kind of mentioned. It came up a couple of times, which is boards. And I know that you're on multiple company boards. And I'll tell you, even from a personal perspective, I have been on a number of nonprofit boards where I've been kind of recruited to donate time to a particular cause. But the idea of being on a company board, even for me, it's something I really don't know very much about. How did you initially learn about it? And if we have kind of an interest in that area, like where could we go to start to learn more about it? What should we know?
So I would say, similar to your career, there's a path to getting on a board. And for many of us, because very few of us can go from no boards to, say, Fortune 500 board. So there's definitely a path to getting there, and often it starts with a nonprofit board. And so what I would tell people, because often, as you mentioned, we get asked and we say yes, but we should think about what's that filter. So one, is this something I'm passionate about? Is this something where I'm going to build my skills or my expertise? So look at that role that you can serve. And even on a nonprofit, you can have a fiduciary responsibility. And so if you look at the things that are valued for a for-profit board, I have the gift of serving on an audit committee, which isn't very glamorous, but that's a real skill. Or maybe it's compensation, or maybe you've run projects. So you have to look at your role and how does it help you tell the story. Mm-hmm. Also look at your network, because often it's not like you have, board postings where you can just go to. It's through either a network or recommendations. So that notion, again, of your brand and letting it be known that you're interested in being on that type of board, I think are some of the first steps. We're really happy that we partnered with the SCA and LinkedIn on an initiative to diversify board composition. And in that case, it's not just looking, again, at the very large boards, but some of these high-growth companies, like Landit, that are starved for talent and for resources. So is there a way to bring your expertise in that way? But I think you have to have a plan for that, just like you have a plan for your career, and choose wisely, because you can imagine how quickly your dance card can become full, because when people see great folks available for little or no compensation, they're going to get their hooks in you. And before you know it, you won't have time to do things that you think, are more fulfilling for yourself.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned little or no compensation. And, I know when you are on a nonprofit board, of course, you don't receive compensation. When you are on a company board, how does that work? How does the compensation typically, or what are the options there?
Sure. So if you're in a startup or for-profit or a high-growth company, the compensation tends to be in the form of options, stock options, because you have alignment with, the company and the mission and the management, et cetera. When you're on a public board or a company that's, ready for prime time, about to go to that stage, there's cash compensation in addition to stock compensation. So, and of course, on most nonprofits, I would dare to say all nonprofits, there's probably little to no compensation, but then there's the qual metrics of the investment and the giving back, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But the most common form of compensation are options or stock.
Okay. And so one thing that I know you're really skilled at, which kind of leads into this options or stock, is negotiation. And I'm curious, I'm assuming that when you join a board that you do have to possibly negotiate that package. Is that a fair thing to say, or does everyone kind of get the same thing across the board?
Mm-hmm. I would say ideally, most boards set up what their compensation is for, say, an outside board member, and that's typically, it's approved by the comp committee, that's typically what you get. So you don't see a lot of negotiation in that regard. Where you would negotiate, of course, when it comes to your salary or your other type of compensation, where we typically don't speak up for ourselves, and there are dire consequences to not negotiating, both financially as well as what does it say about you or what does it signal about you. So it's not so much negotiating for board compensation, it's those other rounds or other roles.
Yeah, that's great. And it's interesting, just in the last week, I've probably talked to 2 or 3 people who said to me, gosh, Angela, I got a job offer. I'm really excited about it, but I'm afraid to ask for more money because I'm afraid something bad will happen. I'm not really comfortable with the amount of money they offered. It seems kind of low, but I'm really not sure if I can do anything about it or what I can do. I mean, you mentioned there are dire consequences. In your perspective, based on your experience, why is it so important that we negotiate our salary?
So there are really 3 reasons. So one is it's about being valued for the worth and the value that you bring to the table. 2, if you don't negotiate, there's the signaling of, well, if she can't advocate for herself, can she advocate or be, a voice of strength for her team or for the company? So there's signaling beyond that initial negotiation. And then there's just the economic of often you run the risk of never being able to catch up. And that's not only catch up in terms of financial compensation, but maybe in terms of promotions or positions. So it's really, really important to negotiate. Now, how you negotiate, it's true that and it is a learned skill, thank goodness, there could be a social cost for not handling it in the right way. Mm-hmm. And there are, those who go in not from a position of strength where, it could have an impact. But what we tell people is, one, you have to be prepared. And by that, doing your research, right? So you should know before you even go in there, what are others doing and what are they receiving for like positions or like organizations. 2, going back to keeping track of your accomplishments, you should be really clear on what are you bringing to the table. And then I think when people get in there and, the nerves start going and your hands start sweating, there are some common mistakes that you don't want to make, i.e. throwing out the first number, i.e. getting emotional, or even some people feel like they have to accept on the spot. You absolutely can take the time to say, okay, I got it, take that, go away, process it, and come back perhaps after you've had a chance to, put all the words and things and maybe the beefing up that you may need. But it's one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves and for our career trajectory, which is negotiate and be your own best advocate. And that requires doing a little work.
So one question.
Getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yes, I totally agree with being comfortable being uncomfortable. So one of the specific questions on this topic that I received was, is it possible that the company, if I ask, even if I ask in an appropriate way, is there any chance the company will take the offer back and they'll say, never mind, you're not the person for us? Have you ever seen that happen?
So the only time I have seen that happen, and I think that's a rare thing, because first of all, you wait till you get the offer because you know that they love you and hopefully you love them.
Right.
But I think it is how you handle it, right? So if you're one person going through the process and then afterwards you turn into this, person who was not, who came through the door, that may give people some pause. But this notion of by advocating or by negotiating that I'm somehow going to be, less wanted or desirable, very, very rarely does that happen. It's about how you come across and how do you handle it. So that I would not be worried about that.
Yeah, I tend to think if an employer pulled back an offer, it's a real good sign I don't want to work for that person.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I'm glad they let me know up front before I took the offer.
And I will tell you, because you negotiate not only that first time, but then it's an ongoing negotiation for different things. And I have just seen time after time after time that colleagues, employees that are valued, employers want to keep great talent, right, as well as you want to stay there. So it's not just the financial things that you negotiate. Sometimes you're negotiating for flexibility or maybe other perks. Mm-hmm. But I'm amazed at what great companies will do in terms of bending to accommodate talent and folks that they want to keep and invest in.
I totally agree. I think a great example of that is vacation. Many people I talk to assume that 2 weeks is all they're getting when they switch jobs, and sometimes they get discouraged from looking just because of that. But I've seen many, many companies make exceptions and give extra vacation to someone to match what they had at their current company or even to exceed it. But you just have to ask. If you don't ask, they're not going to give it to you.
That's exactly right. And when you think about prepping for your, quote, homework, there's the financial, there are things like vacation, maybe there are things like flex time, right? So maybe on Fridays I want to work from home. Some people pay for courses. There are other, perks. Some have amazing snacks. Whatever it may be. There are other things that add to your quality of life that should be taken into consideration when you think about the whole package.
I totally agree. So one last question on the topic of negotiation. You mentioned how important it is, how you kind of bring it up, like how that can impact how the negotiation goes. I'm curious if you could give us an example of a way to bring up asking for more money. Like, how do you actually say it? Like, what words do you use?
Mm-hmm. So something such as, Angela, I'm really, really excited about the offer and what I can not only learn here, but what I can add. Thank you very much for that offer. I understand the number is X. In my research, I know that this is the comp for folks, either whatever it may be, right, in similar industry, et cetera, and I'm hoping that we can do Y. So you always start with a affirmative, if you will, because you're excited, right? This is a job that you would like to have. You state the facts, right? So this isn't an emotional-based thing. This isn't about what's fair. It's about what's market and being compensated, and you're making an ask, but you are rooted in data, right? It's really easy to dismiss emotion. It's really hard to walk away or dismiss data, and that's why having that research in your back pocket to be able to bring and frame it in that way, so you're not putting someone, on the defensive. It is, hey, I want to be here. This is what you've offered. This is the market. Now, let's talk about an alternative. So I think you come from that position.
I love that. And the thing that you said that was just perfect was, it is easy to dismiss emotion. It is hard to dismiss data.
That's the engineer in me, yes.
I'm with you. I'm actually an engineer too, so
love it.
I love the data. Well, I'm very excited about what you're doing, Lisa. And like I said, I checked out Landit. I really enjoyed it. If we're listening today and we'd like to learn more about you and more about Landit, where should we go?
Absolutely. www.landit.com. And thank you. We're so thrilled. We're on a mission, right, to unlock the talent of women around the globe. And that's our goal, was to help everyone find and land their it.
Awesome. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for joining me. This has been great.
Thank you, Angela, for the opportunity.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. And thanks to those of you who sent me questions. You can send me your questions to angela@copelandcoaching.com. You can also send me your questions via Twitter. I'm @CopelandCoach. And on Facebook, I'm Copeland Coaching. And don't forget to help me out. Subscribe on iTunes and leave me a review.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.